The first thing Mara heard was the sound of chains breaking. Deep beneath Blackfang Fortress, where the walls were so thick that even the screams of prisoners could disappear into the stone, something enormous dragged itself across the floor. Metal scraped against rock. Once. Twice. Then came a growl. It was so deep that Mara felt it in her ribs before she heard it properly. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The flames inside the wall torches trembled, throwing long shadows across the corridor. Mara stood perfectly still. Her fingers tightened around the basket of herbs pressed against her chest. Every story she had ever heard about the creature behind that iron door suddenly returned to her. The king's beast. The white wolf that had torn through armored men. The animal that had never obeyed kindness, never accepted food from an unprotected hand, and had left 3 royal handlers carried from the kennels with blood soaking their sleeves.
Rook.
Mara should have turned around. She should have left the herbs beside the door and run until she reached daylight. Instead, one small bundle slipped from her basket. It struck the stone. The growling stopped. Mara stared at the darkness beyond the bars. 2 golden eyes opened. She could barely breathe. The enormous white wolf stepped forward. His fur was thick with old scars. One ear was torn. Iron had rubbed the skin around his neck raw. Mara expected teeth. She expected blood. Instead, without understanding why, she began humming. It was an old melody, for simple notes her mother had sung when Mara was a little girl. The wolf froze. His breathing slowed. Then the creature everyone in Bear believed had been born to kill lowered his enormous head to the floor. His legs folded beneath him, and the Alpha King's deadliest beast lay quietly at Mara's feet. Neither of them knew that someone was watching from the shadows, and neither knew that by sunrise, the entire kingdom would begin asking the same impossible question. Who was this quiet village healer? And why had the monster chosen her? Mara had learned long ago that the safest way to live beneath Blackfang Fortress was to be forgettable. She walked with her eyes lowered when royal riders passed through the village. She spoke softly around soldiers. She never lingered near the fortress gates, never asked questions about the royal family, and never looked too long at the black banners hanging from the towers. The village of Eldermere rested beneath the mountains like something the kingdom had forgotten to finish building. Houses of rough timber leaned against one another along muddy lanes, smoke rose from crooked chimneys, and narrow fields disappeared beneath snow every winter. Beyond the field stood the pine forest, and beyond that rose the mountains. At the highest point stood Blackfang Fortress. Its towers were dark against the sky. Children were warned never to point at them. Mara had been born in one of the smallest houses in Eldermere, the daughter of a healer whose name had disappeared from most records. Her mother had died when Mara was young, leaving behind a wooden box filled with dried herbs, faded cloth, and a few memories Mara could never fully explain. The strongest memory was a song. Her mother used to hum it while preparing medicine. 4 soft notes. Always the same. Mara had never known where the melody came from. She only knew that when she was frightened, humming it made the world seem slightly less cruel. That was why, on the night the royal messenger arrived, she hummed while packing the herbs. The messenger's horse had been covered in frost. His cloak bore the black wolf of King Kaelen. Mara of Eldermere? She had looked up from the bundle of roots in her hands. Yes. You are ordered to report to Blackfang Fortress. She had swallowed. For what? The royal kennels require a healer. Nothing more had been explained. There was no refusal. By sunset, Mara was walking through the fortress gates with a basket against her chest and snow collecting in her hair. The guards searched her twice. They took her knife. They checked the herbs. Then they led her downward. The farther she went, the colder the fortress became. Above ground, Blackfang was built for kings. There were grand halls, carved pillars, polished floors, and windows filled with colored glass. Below ground, there was none of that. There were only stone walls, iron doors,
Chains.
and the smell of animals. Mara heard wolves long before she saw them. Some paced.
Some whined.
One threw itself against a caged door until the metal shook. Then the guard stopped. At the end of the corridor stood a door unlike the others. It was reinforced with thick iron bands. 3 locks held it shut. Mara stared at it. The guard beside her would not meet her eyes. "Leave the herbs outside." She nodded. Her hands were already trembling, but before she could place the basket down, a heavy sound came from the chamber. Something had stood up. The guard stepped backward. Mara heard chains dragging across stone. Then the growl came. It seemed to pass through the door. Her heart slammed against her ribs. One of the herb bundles slipped. It landed on the floor. And somehow, in that terrible silence, Mara began humming. The first note barely existed. The second was quieter. By the fourth, the growling had stopped. Mara looked toward the iron bars. A pair of golden eyes watched her. The wolf emerged slowly. He was enormous. His shoulders were nearly as high as Mara's chest, and his white fur made him appear almost unreal against the black stone. But beneath the size was something that frightened her more than his teeth.
Pain.
There was an old scar across his muzzle, another around his neck. His left foreleg carried a faded burn. Mara slowly lowered herself to the floor. She did not reach for him. She did not call him. She simply continued humming. The wolf took one step, then another. His claws clicked softly against the stone. The guards lifted their weapons. Mara heard the scrape of steel. The wolf heard it too.
His body tightened.
Mara stopped humming. The animal looked at her. For a moment, she thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then she began again. The tension left his shoulders. He lowered his head, and slowly, carefully, he folded himself onto the stone. The guard stared. Mara stared. Nobody moved. Then footsteps echoed from the corridor. A man appeared beneath the torchlight. King Kaelen. Mara had seen his face on royal coins, but coins did not show exhaustion. The king was younger than she expected. Dark hair, a hard expression, a thin scar crossing one eyebrow. He looked first at Mara, then at the wolf, then back at Mara.
Who ordered this?
The guard dropped to one knee. Your Majesty, the healer was ordered to deliver herbs. Kaelen's gaze returned to Rook. That is not what I asked. No one answered. Rook shifted. The king's hand moved toward his sword. Mara instinctively placed one hand against the wolf's shoulder. The movement was small, but every person in the corridor saw it. Rook did not attack. He leaned into her hand. Kaelen's face changed. Only slightly, but Mara saw it. The king was afraid. Not of her, of what he was seeing. Take her away, he ordered. 2 guards approached. Rook rose. The movement was so sudden that both men stopped. The wolf stepped between Mara and them. A low warning growl rolled through the corridor. Kaelen raised a hand. Stop. The guards froze. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. Then the king walked closer. Rook watched him carefully. Kaelen stopped several feet away. So, he murmured, almost to himself, you finally chose someone. Mara looked at him. What? Kaelen did not answer. Instead, he ordered the royal Beastmaster brought immediately. Lord Valen arrived within minutes. He was an older man with silver at his temples and a heavy fur cloak fastened beneath his throat. His fingers were covered in rings, each bearing the symbol of one royal hunting order. He looked at Rook, then at Mara. His expression hardened. What did you do? Mara shook her head. Nothing. Everyone does something. I only hummed. Valen laughed. It was not a kind sound. You expect us to believe a song changed him? Mara looked down at Rook. The wolf had placed his head beside her knee. I don't know what changed him. Valen's eyes narrowed. Kaelen ordered the herbs examined. Nothing unusual was found. No poison. No spell. No drug. Nothing. Yet when Mara eventually stood to leave, Rook rose with her. And when the guards led her away, the wolf began howling. The sound followed her through the corridors. It rose through the stone, through the floors, through the sleeping fortress. Kaelen stood beside the kennel door long after Mara disappeared. The howl finally stopped. The king looked at Valen. How long has he behaved like this? Valen's mouth tightened. 12 years. Kaelen's eyes remained on the empty corridor.
No.
His voice became quieter. How long has he been afraid? Valen said nothing. That silence was the first thing Kaelen remembered when everything began to fall apart. That night, Mara was given a small room near the royal kennels. She did not sleep. Neither did Rook. Sometime after midnight, she heard footsteps outside. She opened the door. Valen stood in the corridor. In his hand was a silver-tipped whip. Mara's stomach dropped. "Move aside." She shook her head. "You cannot go in there. I have trained that animal since he was a pup. He is hurt. He is dangerous. He is afraid." Valen's face hardened. Then he opened the kennel door. Inside, Rook immediately rose. The wolf saw the whip. His pupils widened. His lips pulled back. Valen raised his arm. Rook slammed against the chains. The impact shook the floor. Mara cried out. "Stop." The whip cracked through the air. But before it could touch him, Mara stepped between them. The room went silent. Valen stared at her. Rook stared at her too. Then the wolf lowered his head behind her shoulder. For the first time in 12 years, someone had stood between Rook and the weapon. Above them, Kaelen woke suddenly. A strange feeling had pulled him from sleep. He crossed to his window. Far below, somewhere beneath the fortress, a wolf gave one low, broken sound. The king looked toward the mountains. He did not yet understand what was happening, but he understood one thing. Something inside Blackfang fortress had changed. And by morning, someone would try to destroy it. The next morning, Mara discovered that kindness was much harder to practice inside a royal fortress than in a village. In Eldermere, people knew her. They brought her injured children, sick goats, broken fingers, and winter coughs. At Blackfang, every corridor seemed to have eyes. Servants whispered when she passed. Guards watched her. Nobles smiled too politely. And every person who saw Rook beside her seemed to wonder how long it would take before the beast turned on her. Mara ignored them. She returned to the kennel. Rook was waiting. His bowl was untouched. Mara crouched several feet away. "You should eat." Rook stared at her. She placed a piece of cooked meat on the floor and moved away. The wolf sniffed it. He did not eat. Mara waited. Eventually, Rook crawled forward. He took the meat. Then, he placed himself beside her again. That became their morning ritual.
Food.
Water. Silence. Humming. Mara never forced him to come closer. That was important.
She did not know why.
She only knew that whenever she allowed him to choose, he stayed. Over the following days, she discovered more about him. He hated sudden movements. He hated bells. He slept lightly. He never turned his back to doors. And beneath his thick fur were scars she could not count. Mara cleaned them one by one. Rook allowed it. Sometimes he flinched. Sometimes his muscles tightened. But he never bit her. Kaelen began visiting. At first, he claimed he was inspecting the kennels. Then he came every evening. He stood in the doorway while Mara worked. One night, she glanced over. "You can come inside." The king looked surprised. "Can I?" "You own the fortress." Mara looked at Rook. "He doesn't care." Kaelen entered slowly. Rook watched him. Mara noticed something she had not expected. Rook did not fear Kaelen. He simply did not trust him. That difference stayed in her mind. Kaelen sat several feet away. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was strangely comfortable. Then Kaelen looked at the scars around Rook's neck.
Who did that?
Mara continued applying medicine. "You know who." The king's jaw tightened. "Valen says the scars came from fighting." Mara looked up. "Do you believe him?" Kaelen did not answer. That was answer enough. The king began asking questions. How did Rook respond to bells? How often did he sleep? What did he eat? Did he become aggressive before or after certain sounds? Mara answered everything she knew. Slowly, Kaelen began to understand that the creature he had called his greatest weapon might have been a prisoner all along. But Valen noticed the change. The Beastmaster had spent 12 years building Rook into a symbol, a monster, a threat, a living warning to anyone who challenged the crown. If Mara could prove that Rook was not naturally violent, Valen's authority would begin to crumble. So rumors spread. Mara was a witch. Mara had enchanted the beast. Mara wanted the throne. Mara had bewitched the king. Lady Seraphine repeated the rumors most elegantly. She was beautiful, wealthy, and deeply connected to the royal court. She had expected Kaelen to marry her. Then Mara arrived. Seraphine watched the king's attention shift. That was enough. During a royal feast, the court gathered in the main courtyard. Rook was brought out for an ancient ceremony. Mara immediately disliked it. The wolf wore a heavy collar. 6 handlers held the chains. Kaelen stood beneath the royal banners. The nobles watched. Then the ceremonial bell rang. Rook changed. His body snapped rigid. His breathing became violent. His eyes widened. He pulled against the chains. 1 handler fell. The bell rang again. Rook lunged. The chain broke. Panic spread across the courtyard. Mara ran. Someone shouted at her to stop. She ignored them. She reached Rook. He was trembling so hard that his claws scraped the stone. Mara began humming. 1 note. Then another. Rook's head turned. The courtyard went silent. He found her. His breathing slowed. His enormous body lowered. Then he walked toward her. Not toward the king. Toward Mara. He rested his head against her shoulder. Nobody spoke. Then an arrow struck the stone beside her. Kaelen moved first. He grabbed Mara and pulled her behind him. Rook exploded toward the wall. The assassin fled. Darius, the king's captain, raced after him but returned minutes later empty-handed. Only one thing had been left behind. A black feather. Kaelen recognized it. The Ashen Brotherhood. Darius looked at him. I thought they were dead. So did I. Mara looked at the arrow. Why would they shoot at me? Kaelen examined the shaft. Because they did not want you dead. He turned the arrow toward the light. The poison coating its tip glistened faintly. Sleeping poison. Mara's face went pale. They wanted to take me. That night, Kaelen ordered guards outside her room. But the danger did not come from outside. Mara was examining the scar behind Rook's ear when she saw something beneath the old wound. A symbol. A circle. 3 lines. It looked familiar. She searched through the old book her mother had left her. Near midnight, she found it. The same symbol. A drawing of a white wolf stood beneath it. Mara read the faded words. Guardian of the White Path. Her breath caught. There was more. The old tradition spoke of wolves that could recognize certain voices. Not commands. Not magic. Trust. Mara looked toward Rook. He was sleeping. For the first time, she wondered whether he had chosen her because she possessed some ancient gift. Or because, unlike everyone else, she had never asked him to be anything. Before she could investigate further, an alarm screamed through the fortress.
Fire.
Mara ran into the corridor. Smoke poured upward from the lower kennels. Kaelen was already there. Darius shouted orders. Guards rushed through the smoke. Mara ran toward Rook. The kennel door stood open. The chains lay broken.
Rook was gone.
Blood marked the snow outside. Mara stopped. Kaelen crouched beside it. His fingers touched the stain. He looked up. This isn't Rook's blood. A howl rose from the forest. Then another answered. Then another. Soon, the entire mountain seemed to be filled with wolves. Kaelen stood. Something took him. Mara stared into the dark forest.
No.
Her voice was barely audible. He took someone. Dawn came gray and bitter over the northern forest. Mara rode beside Kaelen without speaking. The king had ordered the fortress sealed, but he had not stayed behind. Neither had Darius. The tracks began beyond the outer wall. Rook's prints were unmistakable. Huge.
Deep. Fresh.
But they were not alone. There were human footprints mixed with them. Mara followed the trail through snow-covered pines until the trees opened around an abandoned mining settlement. The place had been empty for years. Broken roofs leaned beneath snow. Old tools lay rusting beside collapsed sheds. A fire had recently burned inside one of the cabins. Darius raised his sword. They entered carefully. 3 men lay unconscious on the floor. All wore black. All carried Ashen Brotherhood marks. Rook had defeated them, but none were dead. Mara knelt beside one. His shoulder was bruised. His arm was broken, yet his throat was untouched. Rook had chosen not to kill them. That discovery mattered, because everyone in Vare had been told the beast could not control himself. But here was proof.
He could.
He simply chose differently when he was protecting someone. A sound came from the back room. Mara opened the door. An old man sat against the wall. His hands were tied. His gray hair was matted with blood. He looked at Mara, then at Kaelen, and began to cry. His name was Tomas. He had once served as a royal archivist. For years, he had secretly collected records about the Royal Beast program. Rook had found him before Valen's men could kill him. Tomas told them the truth. Rook had never been bred to kill. His mother had been a white guardian wolf from the northern mountains. The old clans had protected these wolves for generations. They guided travelers through winter passes. They guarded sacred valleys. They stayed near wounded animals. They were never used in war. Until Valen. He had acquired Rook's mother through a false royal order. He took her pups. She fought. She died. Rook survived. Then the training began.
Pain. Chains. Bells. Whips. Blood.
Again and again. Until the frightened young wolf learned that whenever the bell rang, someone would suffer unless he attacked first. Mara listened in silence. Kaelen looked sick. Who authorized it? Tomas hesitated. The king. Kaelen's face went still. My father? Tomas nodded. The old king had believed fear was the foundation of power. Rook became his weapon. Every enemy who disappeared became another story about the monster beneath Blackfang. Kaelen had inherited the throne. He had inherited the beast. He had inherited the lie. But Mara had not inherited any of it. She only saw a wounded animal. That was what made her dangerous. When they returned to Blackfang, the council demanded her arrest. They called her a witch. They called Rook an abomination. They demanded the beast be executed. Kaelen stood before them. Mara watched his hands. They were clenched. The old Kaelen would have commanded silence. Instead, he listened. Then he said the one thing the council had not expected.
No.
The room erupted. Mara knew what that word would cost him. Nobles withdrew support. Soldiers questioned orders. Seraphine accused Mara publicly. She has bewitched him. Mara stood quietly. Then she looked at Kaelen. Let me leave. The king stared at her. If I stay, Valen will keep using me against you. If I leave, perhaps he will stop. Kaelen shook his head. You don't owe me that sacrifice. I owe Rook a chance to live. The king said nothing. Mara returned to Eldermere. She thought Rook would remain behind. She was wrong. 3 days later, the village dogs began barking. Mara stepped outside. Snow covered the fields. At the edge of the trees stood Rook. Alone.
Free. Exhausted.
He had broken through the fortress gate and followed her scent across the mountains. Mara walked toward him. Rook lowered his head. She placed her forehead against his. For a moment, neither moved. Then Kaelen appeared on horseback. He dismounted. He approached Rook slowly. In his hand was the collar. The iron collar that had been around the wolf's neck for 12 years. Kaelen removed it. He dropped it into the snow. Rook watched, then turned away. That small movement broke something inside the king. Kaelen looked at Mara. He was never mine. No, Mara said softly. He was never yours either. Kaelen looked at her. Mara rested a hand against Rook's neck. He belongs to himself. Before Kaelen could answer, a horn sounded from the distant fortress. Then another. Black smoke rose above Blackfang. Valen had taken the fortress. By nightfall, Kaelen was declared unfit to rule. Mara, Kaelen, Rook, Darius, and Tomas fled into the mountains. A storm swallowed the trail. Snow blinded them. The horses could go no farther. They walked, hour after hour. Then Mara saw something beneath the snow. Stone. An arch. The same symbol as Rook's scar was carved into it. She touched the mark. The wind stopped. Every sound disappeared. Beneath the arch was a sealed chamber. Inside were paintings, white wolves, ancient kings, mountain valleys. And at the center of the final wall stood a woman. She was humming. A massive white wolf rested at her feet. Mara stepped closer. Her breath disappeared. The woman's face was hers. Tomas had seen ancient records before. He had read histories older than the kingdom itself. But even he had never seen the chamber beneath the mountain. The paintings covered every wall. White wolves traveled beside healers. Kings stood beneath mountain stars. Children placed food near sleeping wolves. There were no chains, no collars, no weapons. At the center of the chamber was the woman who looked like Mara. Tomas touched the wall. The keepers. Mara looked at him. My mother? He nodded slowly. Her mother had been one of the last keepers of the White Path. The tradition had almost disappeared because Valen had hunted those who protected the guardian wolves. Mara remembered things she had forgotten. Her mother's hands, the smell of cedar smoke, snow against the window, a low melody in the dark. She had always thought the song was simply a lullaby. It was not. It was a language of calm, a promise. You are safe. You may choose. You do not have to fight. Mara began to cry. Not because she had discovered she was special, but because she finally understood why her mother had been so afraid. Kaelen stood nearby. He did not interrupt. He simply waited. That night, Mara slept beside the fire, while Rook rested near the entrance. Kaelen watched the wolf. He could have killed me many times. Mara looked up. Why didn't he? Perhaps because you were there. Perhaps because you taught him he didn't have to. The king looked toward the flames. I thought strength meant control. Mara smiled sadly. Most frightened people do. Their journey changed after that. They traveled from village to village. Mara healed people. Tomas showed them the records. Kaelen listened. Darius recruited loyal soldiers. And Rook began changing. He no longer flinched when someone raised a hand. He slept through the night. He allowed children to sit nearby. One little boy offered him a wooden carving of a wolf. Rook sniffed it, then lay down beside the child. Mara watched from across the village square. For the first time, she saw what Rook might have been if someone had loved him as a pup. The sight nearly broke her heart. But peace did not last. Valen captured Darius. He sent word that the captain would die unless Kaelen came alone. Kaelen prepared immediately. Mara stopped him. It's a trap. I know. Then why are you going? Because Darius would come for me. Mara looked at him. Then don't make him choose. Kaelen stopped. They planned together. That was another change. He no longer gave commands and expected obedience. He listened. They prepared to expose Valen before the nobles. Tomas copied the records. Villagers carried them through the kingdom. Darius's supporters waited. For a moment, it seemed they might win without bloodshed. Then Seraphine betrayed them. Their location was exposed. Soldiers surrounded the mountain camp at dawn. Arrows fell through the trees. Rook moved in front of Mara. He could have killed the first soldier. Instead, he knocked the man aside. Another attacked. Rook disarmed him. Mara realized what was happening. Rook was choosing. He was proving that the past no longer controlled him. Then Valen appeared. In his hand was the silver bell. He rang it. Rook froze. The wolf's breathing changed. His claws dug into the earth. Another ring. Rook growled. Another. He turned toward Mara. Kaelen shouted her name. Mara ran toward him. Rook stepped forward. His eyes were filled with terror. Mara stopped within reach. She did not touch him. Not yet. She began humming. The first note shook in her throat. Rook trembled. Valen rang the bell again. Mara continued. The soldiers watched. The villagers watched. Even the king stood frozen. Rook took another step. Mara held out her hand.
He stopped.
His nose touched her fingers.
The bell rang.
Rook closed his eyes, then lowered his head. The sound of the bell continued. It no longer mattered. The wolf had chosen. Valen's face changed. For 12 years, he had believed fear was stronger than trust. He had just watched that belief die. He fled, but not before revealing the final truth. Kaelen's father had known. He had approved everything. The cages, the training,
The deaths.
the lies. Kaelen stood silent. For a moment, Mara thought the revelation had broken him. Then he looked toward Blackfang Fortress. No more. His voice was quiet, but Everyone heard it. Valen retreated there with the remaining soldiers. And he opened every cage. Hundreds of frightened wolves were waiting beneath the fortress. If they escaped into the capital, people would die. If Kaelen wanted to save them, he would have to return to the place where Rook had first learned to fear humanity. The storm arrived the night they returned to Blackfang. Lightning flashed behind the mountains. Thunder rolled across the valleys. The fortress stood above them like a black crown. Mara remembered the first time she had walked through its gates. She had been carrying herbs. She had been afraid. She had believed the wolf behind the iron door was a monster. Now she entered beside him. Rook wore no collar, no chains. No handler held his leash. He walked because he chose to. The resistance entered through an ancient mountain passage, known only to the keepers. Darius led the soldiers. Tomas carried the records. Kaelen moved toward the throne hall. Mara went below, toward the kennels. Rook followed. The door opened. Mara stopped. There were dozens of wolves inside.
Some were young.
Some were old. Many were scarred. Some pressed themselves against the walls. Others snarled at anyone who approached. Mara understood immediately. If the cages open all at once, the wolves would panic. The capital would become a battlefield. She stepped forward and hummed. One wolf lifted its head. Then another. The sound traveled through the stone. Rook answered softly. Mara continued. The wolves began to settle. One by one, their bodies lowered. The kennel became quiet. Mara opened the first cage. The wolf did not run. It followed Rook. Then another. Then another. Rook led them toward the old mountain passage. Above them, Kaelen entered the throne hall. Valen stood beside the throne. He looked almost calm. You cannot rule without fear. Kaelen walked forward. Then I will rule without it. Valen laughed. You sound like your father. Kaelen's expression hardened.
No.
He looked at the soldiers behind Valen. I sound nothing like him. Tomas entered. The records were read. Names.
Dates.
Orders.
Deaths.
The truth filled the throne room. Some soldiers lowered their weapons. Others stepped away from Valen. Lady Seraphine tried to flee. Darius caught her before she reached the treasury. The final confrontation came beneath the fortress. Valen had found Rook. The silver bell was in his hand. He rang it. Rook froze. Mara stopped. Valen smiled. He rang it again. The wolf's muscles tightened. His old scars seemed to burn beneath his fur. The Beastmaster whispered the command he had used for 12 years.
Attack.
Rook stepped toward Kaelen. Then Mara. The distance between them felt enormous. Mara walked forward. Kaelen caught her wrist. Mara. She looked at him. If he attacks? Mara gently freed her hand. Then I will trust him. She stepped forward. Rook's lips trembled. His teeth showed. Mara could see the battle inside him. Years of pain. Years of conditioning. Years of being told what he was. She reached him. Her hand rested against the scar around his neck. And she hummed. Rook shook. Valen rang the bell. Again. 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 But Rook did not move. The sound had once meant pain. Now Mara's song meant choice. Rook opened his eyes. He looked at Valen. Then at the bell. Then at Mara. Slowly he turned away. The bell fell silent. Valen stared.
No.
He raised the weapon in his hand. Kaelen moved. The king stopped him before he could strike Mara. Valen fell. Soldiers surrounded him. Kaelen could have killed him. Instead, he ordered him arrested. Let the kingdom hear what you did. The trial lasted weeks. The records were undeniable. The royal kennels were destroyed. The cages were removed. The surviving wolves were taken to protected forests. Kaelen stood before the kingdom and admitted what his family had done. He did not blame his father. He did not hide behind the crown. He accepted the shame. Then he changed the law. No creature would ever again be bred for execution under the royal seal. Mara was offered a title. She refused. She asked for the old sanctuary to be restored. A place for injured wolves. A place for abandoned children. A place where frightened creatures could recover without chains. Kaelen agreed. Not because she had saved his kingdom, but because he had finally learned to listen. Months passed. The sanctuary grew. Rook changed with them. He disappeared into the forest during the day. He returned at night, sometimes with leaves caught in his fur, sometimes with snow covering his back, sometimes carrying nothing except the quiet look of an animal who had finally learned that he could leave and still come home. Then Tomas found another record. It had belonged to Mara's mother. The document mentioned a second sanctuary beyond the northern peaks, a place where the first white wolves still lived. Mara read the final line twice. The white wolves were never merely guardians of the kingdom. They guarded something older, something hidden beyond the mountains. She looked toward the forest. Rook was already staring north. A distant howl answered. Then another. Then another. Spring came slowly to the mountains. Snow melted from the rooftops. Water ran beneath the bridges. The forest floor filled with small green shoots. Blackfang Fortress changed too. The iron doors of the old kennels were removed. The stone rooms were cleaned. The places where chains had once hung became empty. No one knew what to do with the silence at first. Then children began playing there. Not inside the old cages. Outside. The sanctuary Mara built stood at the edge of the forest. It was simple. Wooden walls. Warm rooms. A healing house. A large open field. And beyond it, hundreds of acres of protected woodland where the wolves could disappear whenever they wished. Mara worked from sunrise until dark. She taught children how to clean wounds, how to leave frightened animals alone, how to approach without forcing, how to understand that silence was sometimes the kindest thing a creature could receive. Rook remained free. That was the most important part. Sometimes he slept beside the healing house. Sometimes he vanished for days. Mara never followed. She trusted him. And every time he returned, he found her. Kaelen visited often. He no longer arrived with an army. He carried firewood. He repaired fences. He listened to villagers. He learned how much work went into a life he had once considered beneath the crown. His relationship with Mara changed slowly. There was no sudden promise. No grand declaration. Just small things. A shared cup beside the fire. A hand passing a bundle of herbs. A glance across a crowded room. One evening, Kaelen helped Mara repair the roof of the sanctuary. He looked down at her. I used to think a king needed everyone to obey him. Mara smiled. And now? Now I think a king should make people feel safe enough to disagree. She looked at him. You are learning. He laughed softly. I had a good teacher. She glanced toward Rook. He's difficult. I wasn't talking about him. Mara looked away, smiling. Winter returned months later. On the longest night of the year, the kingdom held the first festival of the White Wolves. Lanterns were placed along the forest path. Families gathered. Children carried small wooden wolves. No cages were displayed. No chains. No bells. The festival honored the animals that had died beneath the old system. Their names were read aloud. The people listened. Then Mara walked to the edge of the forest. Rook stood among the trees. Moonlight touched his white fur. Mara began humming. The melody traveled over the snow. Rook lifted his head. He walked toward her. Slowly. Without fear. Without command. Without a collar. He stopped before her. Then lowered his enormous head into her hands. The villagers watched. Some cried. Some smiled. Children reached out carefully. Rook allowed them to touch his fur. The creature once known as the Alpha King's killer had become something else. Not a weapon. Not a monster. Not even a royal beast. Just Rook. A wolf who had survived. A wolf who had chosen. Kaelen stood beside Mara. He did not step in front of her. He did not speak for her. He simply stood there. Beside her. Tomas watched the forest. Then his expression changed. Mara. She turned. Beyond the trees stood another white wolf. Then another. Then 3 more. Then a dozen. They watched silently. Rook turned toward them. For a moment, Mara thought he might leave.
He did.
But only after looking back at her. She understood. He was not abandoning her. He was inviting her. The old sanctuary beyond the northern peaks was waiting. Her mother's story was not finished. Neither was Rook's. Kaelen looked toward the mountains. How far? Mara smiled. Far enough. The three of them walked toward the forest. Rook ahead, Mara behind him, Kaelen beside her. The lanterns of the kingdom slowly disappeared behind the trees. Snow began falling.
Softly.
The mountains rose before them. For years, Bear had believed the strongest creature was the one capable of killing without hesitation. They had been wrong. Strength was the hand that reached toward something frightened without forcing it closer. Strength was the king who admitted his family had been wrong. Strength was the woman who stood before a monster and refused to see only its teeth. And strength was the wounded wolf who, after 12 years of being commanded to kill, finally discovered that he was allowed to choose. Rook stopped at the edge of a frozen ridge. Below, beyond the mountains, moonlight spilled across a hidden valley. White wolves moved through the trees.
Hundreds of them.
Mara stared. Her mother's song rose quietly in her heart. Kaelen stood beside her. Rook looked back one final time. Then he walked down into the valley. Mara followed. And behind them, the kingdom they had left behind was no longer ruled by fear. It had learned something the old kings had never understood. A creature cannot be made loyal through pain. A heart cannot be commanded into love. And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is not a beast that knows how to kill. It is a wounded creature that finally discovers it has the freedom to say no. Rook had said no to the bell. No to the chains. No to the man who had spent 12 years controlling him. And when Mara had hummed, he had chosen something else. He had chosen her. Not because she owned him. Not because she controlled him. But because, for the first time in his life, someone had given him a choice. The white wolf disappeared into the moonlit valley. Mara followed. Kaelen followed her. And high above them, beneath a sky full of cold stars, the mountains answered with the howl of an entire forgotten bloodline coming home.